Welcome back. This is the second video in my series of videos on the exposure triangle, which is part of a larger series of videos about photography basics. Now, this side of the exposure triangle is called the aperture, and you'll sometimes hear it referred to as the f-stop. Now, the aperture is like the iris of your eye. Sometimes it goes small, sometimes it goes big and wide. That's how it controls how much light it allows on the sensor or the film of your camera, and therefore whether the exposure is bright or whether the exposure is dark. But the aperture has other characteristics. So in a very bright environment, if you want to control that brightness using your aperture, you would make the hole small. Now if the hole is small, counterintuitively the number is high. So f16 is a high f-stop, f1.4 is a low f-stop. So f1.4 is also called a wide f-stop because the hole is wide. f16 is a small hole and it's called a narrow f-stop. Now, I find the numbers personally counterintuitive, but essentially the way to think of it is, on an old lens, you would turn a ring on the lens to choose the f-stop. The more turns you made, the smaller the hole got. So the higher number of turns, f16, the smaller the hole will get. That's not the correct description, but it's a useful way to think about it. Now, if you have your lens wide open, which means at its widest f-stop or its lowest f-stop number, the aperture is wide open, what you get is something called a shallow depth of field, meaning when the subject is in focus, so perhaps somebody's eye, the things behind and in front of that are not in focus, they're blurry. Now, as you make the hole smaller and increase the f-stop, the amount of things in focus, in front and behind, increases. So you lose blurriness. We call this a depth of field. So a wide f-stops like f1.4, f1.8, f2.8 has a small and narrow range of things that are in focus, a narrow depth of field, and as you increase the number and make it narrower, the amount of stuff in focus gets bigger. So what's the practical application of that? In portraiture, people like to use, particularly outdoors, a wide f-stop, so a very narrow depth of field, in order to achieve a blurry background. They do that because it helps to make the background look less cluttered, makes it look smooth, and allows you to draw your focus on the person's face. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, in landscape photos, people tend to use a small aperture so that they can get as much of the scene in focus as possible. So they want the hills in the background, the trees in the middle, and the bushes in the front, all in focus. So they tighten the aperture to get a wide depth of field. Now, there are a few other factors that control depth of field. So an f1.4 lens, which is shot wide open at f1.4, has a narrow depth of field. The closer you are to the subject, the narrower that depth of field gets. The further away from the subject you go, the deeper that depth of field gets. But that's aperture, and if you want to shoot with a wide depth of field, then you would have to make and get a balanced exposure. You would have to increase your shutter speed so it's open for less time, so make it faster, make a faster shutter speed, or a less sensitive ISO. So basically you would reduce the amount of light coming through via the shutter speed or via the ISO if you wanted to shoot your lens wide open. If you wanted to shoot your lens stopped down, which means narrow, high f-stop number, high aperture number, then you would need to let more light in to the sensor with either making it more sensitive with an increased ISO number or by slowing down the shutter so that it's open for longer. So that's aperture as part of the exposure triangle.